The Ballroom Conspiracy. The Ballroom Conspiracy. Chapter 1. The Wallflower's Witness. Miss Beatrice Grey had perfected the art of invisibility long before she ever attended her first London ball. At 23, she understood that a young woman of modest means and unremarkable connections possessed a singular advantage. No one ever noticed her watching. The March evening had promised nothing more remarkable than the usual parade of titled gentlemen assessing heiresses and heiresses assessing titled gentlemen. The Duchess of Lansdowne's annual charity ball at Wentworth House was the final significant social event before Parliament resumed session, and every eligible person of consequence had crowded into the grand ballroom beneath the infamous chandeliers, 3 massive tiers of Waterford crystal that had hung in the Wentworth family for over a century. Beatrice had positioned herself near the supper-room doors, her lavender gown deliberately plain, her dark hair arranged without the elaborate curls that marked the fashionable young ladies circulating on the dance floor. From this vantage point, she could observe without being observed, a skill honed during 4 seasons of watching her more beautiful, more wealthy acquaintances find husbands while she remained firmly attached to the wall. Still playing the spectator, Miss Grey? She started slightly at the voice beside her. Mr. David Campbell materialized from the crowd with the ease of a man accustomed to moving unnoticed himself, though for entirely different reasons. As secretary to the Duke of Atherton, he occupied that curious social netherworld where he was too important to ignore, yet too insignificant to merit real attention. Mr. Campbell. She inclined her head. I find the view from here instructive. Do you? He followed her gaze across the ballroom. And what do you see? She considered the question seriously. Lady Catherine Winthrop has danced twice with Viscount Ashford, which will be announced as an engagement by Easter. Lord Pembroke has consumed 7 glasses of champagne and will require assistance to his carriage, and the Duchess is distressed because the ice sculpture is melting faster than the lobster patties. Campbell's mouth curved. You miss nothing. On the contrary. Beatrice turned to face him properly. I miss everything, but I observe quite diligently. Their quiet amusement was interrupted by a commotion near the main entrance. The Duke of Atherton had arrived, and his presence rippled through the assembled company like wind across water. He was a man who commanded attention not through ostentation, but through sheer force of presence. Tall, silver-templed at 52, with the kind of face that belonged on old coins or in history books. Beatrice had seen him before, of course. Everyone in London had. He was one of the most powerful men in England, leader of the reformist faction in the House of Lords, and the likely next Prime Minister should the current government fall, which everyone expected it would, following the crucial vote on the Industrial Reform Bill scheduled for the following week. But tonight, watching him move through the crowd, Beatrice noticed something that made her frown. The Duke paused at the threshold of the ballroom, his gaze travelling upward toward the massive chandelier that dominated the centre of the room. For just a moment, his expression shifted, not fear precisely, but recognition, as if he had expected to find something there. Then he was swept away by well-wishers, and the moment passed. You work for him, Beatrice said to Campbell, who had not moved from her side. I have that honour. He seems troubled. Campbell's bland expression did not flicker. The Duke has many matters on his mind. The Reform Bill, as I'm sure you know, is encountering significant opposition. There are those who would prefer to see it fail. Lord Stanhope's faction, among others. Campbell's tone suggested the subject was closed. If you'll excuse me, Miss Grey, I should attend to my duties. He melted back into the crowd, and Beatrice was alone again with her observations. The evening wore on. The lobster patties were consumed, the ice sculpture reduced to a sad puddle of swans, and Lady Catherine Winthrop's engagement was confirmed through the simple expedient of her being discovered in the library with Viscount Ashford, a circumstance that caused her mother to look simultaneously horrified and triumphant. Beatrice had long since exhausted her interest in the dancers and had begun studying the room itself. Wentworth House was a marvel of Georgian architecture, its ballroom a symphony of white and gold, with those 3 magnificent chandeliers casting prismatic light across the proceedings. The largest hung directly above the centre of the dance floor, a constellation of crystal that must have weighed several tons. She was calculating the approximate number of individual crystals, surely in the thousands, when she noticed a man she did not recognize. This was itself unremarkable. She did not know everyone in London. But something about him drew her attention. He was dressed appropriately in evening clothes, but they fit him poorly, as if borrowed or hastily altered. He moved not like a gentleman, but like a workman, with a purposeful economy of motion that seemed out of place among the languid aristocrats. And he kept looking up. His gaze tracked repeatedly to the great chandelier, but not with the casual appreciation of an admirer of fine crystal. He was studying it, measuring it, and in his hand he carried a glass of champagne that he did not drink. Beatrice watched him circle the perimeter of the dance floor, never venturing into the centre, always keeping to the edges where the light was dimmer. Twice he was addressed by servants offering trays of refreshments, and twice he waved them away without shifting his attention from the ceiling. When he reached the far side of the ballroom, near the musicians' gallery, he paused. Beatrice saw him reach into his pocket and withdraw something small, a watch, perhaps, or a snuff box. But he did not look at it. Instead, he held it in his palm for a moment, then returned it to his pocket and continued his circuit. She should have dismissed it. She should have returned to her contemplation of the engaged couple, or the drunk lord, or the distressed duchess. But something held her there, watching that man make his slow, deliberate way around the room. When he reached the supper-room doors, the very spot where she had stood with Mr. Campbell earlier, he stopped again. This time, he looked directly at the chandelier's anchor point in the ceiling, a decorative medallion of carved plaster. His lips moved, as if counting, or praying. Then he turned and walked directly toward the servants' staircase. Beatrice made a decision she would question for the rest of her life. She followed him. The servants' staircase was narrow and dark, a utilitarian afterthought hidden behind a tapestry. Beatrice gathered her skirts and climbed, grateful that her dancing slippers made no sound on the wooden treads. Above her, she could hear the man's heavier footsteps, steady and unhurried. He emerged on the floor above, which housed the family's private apartments. Beatrice knew this only from the house plans that had been published in last month's society papers. The Duchess was notorious for allowing journalists to print details of her home. The man seemed to know it as well, for he turned immediately toward a door that led, if Beatrice's memory served, to the attic spaces above the ballroom. She hesitated at the threshold. If she was caught here, her reputation would be destroyed. An unmarried woman following a strange man into the servants' quarters of a ducal mansion. She would be cast out of society, sent home in disgrace, condemned to a life of rural spinsterhood, watching her younger cousins marry. But the man had looked at the chandelier with such intensity, such purpose. She opened the door. The attic was a labyrinth of trunks, dust sheets, and forgotten furniture. Light filtered up from the ballroom below, through gaps in the floorboards, creating a strange, striped twilight. Beatrice moved carefully, avoiding anything that might creak or shift, following the sound of the man's movements ahead. She found him in a small chamber directly above the ballroom's centre. Here, the floor gave way to an open space where the chandelier's chains disappeared through a reinforced opening, connected to a massive iron winch mechanism that allowed the fixture to be lowered for cleaning. The man stood before this apparatus, studying it with the same intensity he had shown from below. Beatrice pressed herself against a trunk and watched. The man produced his pocket watch again, but it was not a watch. When he opened it, she saw metal tools gleaming inside. He selected one and began working on the winch's locking mechanism, his movements swift and sure. She did not understand what she was seeing until he removed a critical bolt and slipped it into his pocket. The chandelier was now held in place by a single remaining bolt, its chains still wrapped around the winch but no longer properly secured. A strong vibration, the musicians in the gallery below, striking up a particularly energetic waltz, might be enough to shake it loose. Or perhaps he had done something else, something she could not see from her hiding place. He stepped back to examine his work, and in that moment, the light from below caught his face fully for the first time. Beatrice memorized every detail. The thin scar curving from his left eyebrow into his hairline, the broken nose, the small mole beside his mouth. She would know him anywhere, she thought. If she ever saw him again, she would know him. Then he turned toward her hiding place, and she stopped breathing. For a long, terrible moment, he stared directly at the trunk where she crouched. Had she moved? Made a sound? She could not remember. She could only press herself smaller, smaller, willing herself to become part of the shadows. He took a step toward her. Below, the music swelled. The waltz reached its crescendo, and the floorboards vibrated with the force of dozens of dancing feet. The chandelier chains groaned. The man's eyes widened. He spun and fled, crashing through the attic toward a far exit, and Beatrice was left alone with the groaning, straining metal and the terrible knowledge of what was about to happen. She ran. She did not think about silence or discovery or reputation. She ran for the servants' staircase, for the tapestry, for the ballroom where hundreds of people danced beneath a death trap. She burst through the door and down the stairs, her skirts tangling around her legs, her heart pounding so hard she could hear nothing else. She reached the ballroom just as the chandelier fell. The sound was beyond description, a crash that was also a scream, crystal exploding like shrapnel, metal chains whipping through the air like serpents. Beatrice saw it happen as if time had slowed, the great fixture tearing free of the ceiling, plummeting toward the dancers below, the moment of frozen horror on hundreds of faces. And then the screaming began. Beatrice pushed forward, not away. She had to know, she had to see. The crowd surged around her, people fleeing in panic, but she fought against them, moving toward the cloud of dust and crystal that marked the disaster's center. Through the chaos, she saw him, the Duke of Atherton, standing exactly where the chandelier had fallen. But he was not beneath it. He stood perhaps 10 feet away, untouched except for a thin line of blood on his cheek, where a flying crystal had cut him. Beside him, Mr. Campbell had his arm, was urging him towards safety. But the Duke was not moving. He was staring at the wreckage with an expression Beatrice could not read, not shock, not fear, but something else entirely. Recognition, perhaps, or confirmation. Then the Duke's gaze lifted, and he looked directly at Beatrice. For a moment, they were the only two still figures in a maelstrom of panic. She, in her plain lavender gown, hair escaping its pins, chest heaving from her flight down the stairs. He, powerful and composed despite the blood on his face, despite the tons of crystal that had nearly crushed him. He knew, she realized. He knew someone had tried to kill him. And somehow, impossibly, he knew that she knew too. Then Mr. Campbell succeeded in moving him, and the moment shattered like the chandelier itself, and Beatrice was alone in the crowd, holding her terrible secret like a handful of broken glass. Chapter 2. Questions and Answers. The morning after the ball, London awoke to news that shocked even a city accustomed to sensation. The Duke of Atherton, one of the most powerful men in England, had narrowly escaped death when a chandelier collapsed at Wentworth House. The official account attributed the incident to faulty maintenance, a tragic accident that had injured 17 people and killed 2 servants who had been standing in the supper room doorway. Beatrice read the newspapers in her aunt's morning room with hands that would not stop trembling. The servants who died. She had passed that doorway moments before the collapse. If she had been 10 seconds slower descending from the attic, if she had paused to catch her breath, if she had not run. She set down the paper and pressed her hands flat against the table to still them. "Are you unwell, Beatrice?" Her Aunt Prudence looked up from her own correspondence. "You've hardly touched your breakfast." "I am perfectly well, Aunt, only tired from the late night." Such a dreadful business. Aunt Prudence shuddered. To think what might have happened if you had been on the dance floor. Your mother would never forgive me for exposing you to such danger. Beatrice made an appropriate noise of agreement. Her aunt had no idea how close she had come to far greater danger than a dancing accident. The Morning Post arrived, providing a welcome distraction. But among the invitations and social notices was a plain white envelope addressed to Miss Beatrice Gray in a hand she did not recognize. She opened it beneath the table, out of her aunt's sight. "Miss Gray, I must speak with you regarding the events of last evening. Please do not be alarmed, but I believe you may have information of great importance. I will call at your residence this afternoon at 3 o'clock. Yours faithfully, D. Campbell." Beatrice folded the note carefully and slipped it into her pocket. So she had not imagined that moment of recognition. Mr. Campbell had seen her too, or the Duke had told him, and now they wanted to know what she knew. The question was whether she could trust them. Mr. Campbell arrived precisely at 3, looking as composed and unremarkable as he had at the ball. Aunt Prudence received him in the drawing-room with barely concealed curiosity. A gentleman caller for her wallflower niece was an event worthy of investigation. "Mr. Campbell was at the ball last evening," Beatrice explained, before her aunt could interrogate him. "He wished to ensure I had recovered from the fright." "How very considerate." Aunt Prudence settled into her chair with the air of a woman prepared to remain for the duration. "I shall ring for tea." "Thank you, madam, but I fear I cannot stay long." Campbell's tone was regretful but firm. "The Duke requires my attendance. I merely wish to pay my respects to Miss Gray and assure myself of her well-being." Aunt Prudence looked disappointed, but could hardly argue with the demands of a duke. She withdrew to the far end of the room, close enough to chaperone, but too far to overhear quiet conversation. Campbell positioned himself with his back to her, facing Beatrice. "You were not on the dance floor when the chandelier fell." "It was not a question." "I was near the supper room doors," Beatrice said carefully. "I saw everything." "Did you?" His eyes searched her face. "Saw everything, Miss Gray, or saw something in particular?" She considered her answer. The man in the attic had done something criminal, certainly. But was Campbell asking, as the Duke's secretary, or as something else? She had no way of knowing whose interests he truly served. "I saw a great many people panicking," she said, "and I saw the Duke escape what should have been his death." "Should have been." Campbell's voice dropped lower. An interesting choice of words. "Is it? The chandelier fell directly above where he had been standing moments before. If he had not moved toward the supper room when he did..." "How did you know where he had been standing?" Beatrice realized her mistake. She had not been on the dance floor. She could not have seen the Duke's position before the collapse unless she had been watching him specifically. "I observed him earlier in the evening," she said, recovering as smoothly as she could. "Everyone observed him. He was the most important person in the room." "You observe many things, I think." Campbell's expression was impossible to read. "The Duke would like to meet with you, privately. He believes you may have seen something that could help us understand what truly happened last night. The newspapers say it was an accident." "The newspapers say many things." He held her gaze. "Will you come?" "Tomorrow afternoon at Atherton House. I will send a carriage." Beatrice should have refused. She should have pleaded feminine sensibilities and a desire to forget the whole dreadful business. But the memory of that man in the attic, removing the bolt, studying his work with such satisfaction, she could not forget it, and she could not ignore the possibility that the Duke, whatever his reasons, might be her only chance to see justice done. "I will come," she said. Atherton House occupied a commanding position on Grosvenor Square, its facade a statement of power and permanence that needed no adornment. Beatrice felt distinctly small as she mounted the steps the following afternoon, but she refused to let intimidation prevent her from learning the truth. Campbell met her in the entrance hall and led her not to the formal receiving rooms, but up a private staircase to the Duke's study. It was a comfortable room, she noted with surprise. Worn leather chairs, bookshelves crammed with volumes, a desk covered in papers that spoke of urgent business rather than leisurely correspondence. The Duke rose as she entered. In the daylight he looked older than he had in the ballroom, the lines on his face deeper, the shadows beneath his eyes more pronounced, but his gaze was just as penetrating. "Miss Grey, thank you for coming." "Your Grace." She curtsied, then accepted the seat he offered. Campbell positioned himself by the door, a silent sentinel. The Duke returned to his chair behind the desk, but leaned forward, his forearms resting on the leather blotter, his attention fixed entirely on Beatrice. "I will be direct with you, Miss Grey, because I suspect you prefer directness to prevarication. Someone attempted to murder me 2 nights ago. The chandelier was deliberately sabotaged, and I believe you witnessed the sabotage." Beatrice's heart stuttered, but she kept her voice steady. "What makes you think so?" "Because when I looked up after the collapse, I saw a young woman emerging from the servants' staircase with dust on her gown and terror on her face. Not the terror of someone who had witnessed a disaster, but the terror of someone who knew it was coming." He paused. "That young woman was you." She could deny it. She could claim she had merely sought a quieter route to the supper room, had become lost, had been frightened by the crash. But the Duke's eyes told her he would not believe such excuses. "There was a man," she said quietly, "in the attic above the ballroom. I followed him." The Duke exchanged a glance with Campbell. "Tell me everything." So she did. She described the poorly fitted evening clothes, the circuit of the ballroom, the attention to the chandelier's anchor point. She described the ascent to the attic, the work on the winch mechanism, the removal of the bolt. And she described the man's face, every detail she had memorized in that moment of terrible clarity. When she finished, the Duke sat back in his chair, his expression grave. "You are remarkably composed for a young lady who has just described witnessing an attempted murder." "I am remarkably composed for a young lady who has spent 2 days wondering whether the murderer saw her hiding behind a trunk." "He did not see you." Campbell spoke for the first time. "We have questioned the servants. No stranger was seen leaving through the attic exit. If he had seen you, he would have ensured your silence." The cold practicality of the statement made Beatrice shiver. "Then he does not know I exist. Which is precisely why you must remain unknown." The Duke leaned forward again. "Miss Grey, what you have told me confirms my worst suspicions. This was not the act of a lone madman. This was professional work, carefully planned, and it was intended to kill me before the Reform Bill vote. Your enemies in Parliament?" "Some of my enemies sit in Parliament, certainly, but they have more civilized methods of opposing me." He smiled without humor. "No, this was something else. Someone wants me dead before that vote because they know I can deliver the votes needed to pass the bill. Without me, the reformists will fragment, and the bill will fail." Beatrice struggled to understand. But who would kill to prevent a reform bill? Someone with much to lose if it passes. The bill would regulate factory conditions, limit working hours for children, mandate safety inspections. There are men whose entire fortunes are built on the current system, men who would do anything to preserve it. Lord Stanhope's name hung unspoken in the air between them. He was the leader of the industrial faction in the Lords, owner of countless factories, and the Reform Bill's most vocal opponent. "You think Lord Stanhope," Beatrice began. "I think nothing yet." The Duke's voice was firm. "I have suspicions, but suspicions are not evidence, and without evidence I cannot act." "Is that why you asked me here? For evidence?" "For your observations, yes, but also to warn you." His eyes held hers with an intensity that made her breath catch. "If the man you saw was a professional assassin, he will not stop because his first attempt failed. He will try again, and if he learns that a witness exists, he will try to eliminate that witness as well." Beatrice had considered this, in the dark hours of the night when sleep would not come, but hearing it spoken aloud made it terrifyingly real. "What would you have me do?" "Nothing. Go on with your life as if nothing has happened. Attend the social events expected of you. Be seen. But tell no one what you saw, not even your family. And if you notice anything unusual, anyone watching you, any stranger asking questions, send word to Campbell immediately." He gestured to his secretary, who produced a card with an address written on it. "A safe house," Campbell explained. "If you ever feel threatened, go there. Someone will be present at all times." Beatrice took the card, feeling its weight as if it were made of lead. "You believe the danger is that immediate?" "I believe in being prepared." The Duke stood, signalling the interview was at an end. "Miss Grey, you have done your country a great service today. I will not forget it. And when this is over, I will ensure you are properly thanked. But for now, you must be careful. More careful than you have ever been in your life." She rose and curtsied, then paused at the door. "Your Grace, may I ask you something?" "Of course." "When you entered the ballroom that night, you looked up at the chandelier, before anything had happened, before anyone had touched it. You looked up, and you recognized something. What was it?" For the first time, the Duke's composure faltered. Just slightly, just for an instant. But Beatrice saw it. "I thought I saw a shadow," he said quietly. "A shadow where no shadow should be. I told myself it was nothing, a trick of the light." He met her eyes. "I was wrong to dismiss it. I will not make that mistake again." Chapter 3. The Conspirator's Web. The days that followed were the longest of Beatrice's life. She attended morning calls and afternoon teas, smiled at gossip about the chandelier accident, and listened to Lady Catherine Winthrop's endless wedding plans with a patience she had not known she possessed. All the while, her mind churned with questions she could not ask and fears she could not share. She saw the man twice. The first time was in a milliner's shop on Bond Street. She was examining ribbons when she caught a reflection in the glass case. A figure across the street, standing perfectly still, watching the shop. The scarred face, the broken nose. For one frozen moment their eyes met in the glass. Then he turned and walked away, and by the time Beatrice reached the door, he was gone. She did not send word to Campbell. What would she say? That she had seen a man on a street? That he had looked at her? It was not enough, and some instinct she could not name told her to wait, to watch, to learn more before she revealed herself. The second time was at the opera. She was in her aunt's box, ostensibly watching a mediocre performance of Don Giovanni, when she saw him in the pit below. Not in a box, not among the fashionable attendees, but standing against the wall beside an exit, his face half hidden by a programme. He was not watching the stage. He was watching the boxes, watching the Duke of Atherton's box. The Duke was not present. He had sent word that parliamentary duties prevented his attendance, but the man did not know that. He stood there for the entire first act, watching, waiting, and Beatrice watched him watching, her hands cold in her lap, her heart pounding a rhythm that had nothing to do with Mozart. When the interval came, he slipped out through the exit, and Beatrice made a decision. She rose, murmured something to her aunt about needing fresh air, and followed him. The corridor outside was crowded with opera-goers seeking refreshment and conversation. Beatrice pushed through them, keeping her eyes fixed on the dark head moving steadily toward a side door. He was not hurrying, not looking back. He had no reason to suspect he was being followed. But someone else was watching. Beatrice saw them just before they reached him. Two men in respectable evening clothes, moving with the same purposeful economy she had noted in the assassin. They intercepted him at the side door, and for a moment, the three figures formed a tableau. The assassin startled, the newcomers calm and expectant. Then the assassin nodded once, and all three vanished through the door. Beatrice hesitated only a moment before following. This was foolish, dangerous, possibly fatal. But the door led to a service staircase, and the service staircase led to an alley, and the alley opened onto a quiet street where a carriage waited with its lamps unlit. She pressed herself against the wall and watched. The assassin approached the carriage window. Someone inside handed him a folded paper, which he opened and read by the light of a distant gas lamp. His face, illuminated briefly, showed no emotion, only the cold concentration of a professional receiving instructions. Then he nodded again, folded the paper, and walked away into the night. The carriage remained where it was, its horses stamping impatiently, its occupant invisible behind dark glass. Beatrice should have retreated. She should have returned to the opera, to her aunt, to the safe and ordinary world she had so recklessly abandoned. But the carriage held answers. She was certain of it. And if she could identify its owner, she would have something real to bring to the Duke. She crept closer, keeping to the shadows, grateful for her dark cloak and the inadequate lighting of the mews. The carriage bore no crest, no identifying marks, deliberately anonymous. But as she drew alongside, a gust of wind caught the curtain at the window, lifting it just enough for her to see inside. An old man, silver-haired, sharp-featured, dressed in the height of fashion despite his years. He held a cane with a gold handle, and his eyes, even in the dim light, held an expression of absolute command. Beatrice had seen that face in newspaper sketches, in political cartoons, in the galleries of the House of Lords. Lord Stanhope. She stumbled backward, her foot catching on a cobblestone, and the sound echoed in the narrow street like a gunshot. The carriage driver turned, the curtain fell, and Beatrice ran. She ran through alleys and across squares, her lungs burning, her mind blank with terror. She did not stop until she reached Grosvenor Square, until she was pounding on the door of Atherton House, until Campbell's startled face appeared in the opening and pulled her inside. "Lord Stanhope," she gasped. "The assassin! I saw them! Lord Stanhope is behind it!" Campbell sat her down in the Duke's study with a glass of brandy she did not want and a blanket she did not need. She was shaking, she realized. Shaking uncontrollably, her teeth chattering despite the fire blazing in the grate. The Duke arrived within minutes, roused from a late session of Parliament. He listened without interruption as Beatrice told her story, his face growing grimmer with each word. "You are certain it was Stanhope?" "As certain as I am standing here. I saw his face. I saw the cane with the gold handle, the one he always carries. It was him." The Duke exchanged a look with Campbell. "This changes things." "It confirms things," Campbell corrected. "We suspected. Now we know." "But we cannot act." The Duke's voice was heavy. A young woman's word against a peer of the realm, with no proof beyond a glimpse in a darkened carriage. It would never stand. "What about the assassin?" Beatrice's voice was steadier now. "If you could find him, capture him, make him talk." "He vanished into the night, Miss Grey. London has thousands of alleys and millions of shadows. We could search for years and never find him." The Duke's shoulders sagged. "I am sorry. Your courage has given us certainty. but certainty is not enough. Beatrice set down the brandy glass. Then we must make it enough. We must find proof, real proof, evidence that cannot be dismissed. The assassin will try again. The vote is in 4 days. He must act before then, or Stanhope's cause is lost. You want to use yourself as bait? Campbell's voice was flat. Absolutely not. I want to use myself as an observer. I am already watching. I have been watching for days without being detected. If I continue, you were nearly detected tonight. The Duke's tone was firm. You stumbled. You ran. If the driver had pursued you instead of remaining with the carriage, you would be dead. But I am not dead, and I am the only one who knows what the assassin looks like. She leaned forward, willing them to understand. You cannot watch for him. You don't know his face, but I do. Let me continue. Let me help. The Duke studied her for a long moment. Why? Why are you so determined to risk your life for this? It was a fair question. Beatrice considered it honestly. Because those 2 servants died, because they were standing in the supper room doorway, and if I had been 10 seconds faster, they might have lived. Because someone must speak for them, and no one else will. Something shifted in the Duke's expression. Respect, perhaps, or recognition of a kindred spirit. Very well, but you will not do this alone. Campbell will accompany you to every event, watch from the shadows while you watch from the crowd, and at the first sign of danger, you withdraw. No heroics, no risks. Is that understood? Beatrice nodded. Completely. She did not tell him that she had already decided in the depths of her own heart that some risks were worth taking. Chapter 4. The Final Reckoning. The night before the Reform Bill vote, Lord Stanhope hosted a ball. It was a masterpiece of political theatre, an ostentatious display of wealth and power designed to remind everyone who attended that Stanhope's faction controlled vast resources and would not yield easily. The guest list included every peer whose vote remained undecided, every journalist who might be influenced by champagne and flattery, and, through the careful manipulation of social obligations, the Duke of Atherton himself. You cannot attend, Campbell had argued when the invitation arrived. It is a trap. Of course it is a trap. The Duke had been uncharacteristically calm. But if I do not attend, I signal fear, and fear will cost me votes I cannot afford to lose. So the Duke would go, and Campbell would go with him, and somewhere in the shadows of Stanhope's magnificent townhouse, Beatrice Grey would watch and wait for a man with a scarred face. She had obtained her own invitation through means that would have horrified her aunt, a whispered word to Lady Catherine Winthrop, now Viscountess Ashford, about her desperate desire to attend the most important event of the season. Newly married and eager to show off her status, Lady Catherine had insisted that her dear friend Miss Grey must join their party. And so Beatrice found herself entering Lord Stanhope's ballroom on the arm of a viscount, wearing her finest gown, borrowed from Lady Catherine, her eyes already scanning the crowd for a face she knew too well. The ballroom was larger than the Duchess of Lansdowne's, more opulent, more deliberately impressive. Chandeliers hung everywhere, safe ones, Beatrice assumed, installed by workmen Stanhope trusted. The guests glittered like jewels, their conversations a hum of politics and intrigue beneath the music. Beatrice detached herself from Lady Catherine's party as soon as decorum permitted, and began her circuit of the room. She moved as she had at the Duchess's ball, along the edges, avoiding the centre, appearing to be merely another wallflower with nothing better to do than observe. She did not see the assassin. She saw Lord Stanhope holding court near the orchestra, his gold-handled cane tapping time to the music. She saw the undecided peers accepting champagne and making non-committal noises. She saw Campbell stationed near a pillar, his eyes constantly moving, but the assassin was not there. Perhaps he would not come. Perhaps Stanhope, having failed once, had decided against another attempt in so public a setting. Perhaps. A movement near the supper-room doors caught her eye. He was there. Dressed not as a guest but as a servant in the plain livery of Stanhope's household staff. A tray of champagne glasses in his hands, his head respectfully lowered, moving through the crowd with the same purposeful economy she remembered. Beatrice's heart stopped, then raced forward. She watched him circle the room, offering champagne to guests who barely glanced at him. He was not heading toward the Duke, she realized. Not yet. He was positioning himself, waiting for the right moment. She needed to warn Campbell without alerting the assassin. She began moving, slowly, carefully, keeping pillars and groups of guests between herself and the man in livery. But the ballroom was crowded, and her progress was agonizingly slow. She watched the assassin draw closer to the Duke's position, closer, closer. And then she saw the second man. He was also in livery, also carrying a tray, also moving with that too purposeful gait. But his tray held not champagne, but covered dishes, and he was approaching the Duke from the opposite direction, a path that would intersect with the assassins at the exact spot where the Duke stood talking with a group of undecided peers. A coordinated attack. 2 assassins, 2 weapons, 1 target. Beatrice stopped calculating risks. She stepped directly into the assassin's path. He saw her immediately. He could hardly miss her, standing there in her borrowed finery, blocking his way. For 1 heartbeat, his expression did not change. Then recognition flickered in his eyes, and she knew, that he remembered the attic, that he understood exactly who she was. "Move aside, miss." His voice was soft, pleasant, utterly at odds with his purpose. "You are interfering with the service. You are going to kill him." She kept her voice equally soft, equally pleasant. "I cannot allow that." The assassin's eyes flickered past her, to his partner approaching from the other side. He made a tiny gesture, a signal, and the second man altered his course, circling wider. "You cannot stop us," the assassin said. "There are 2 of us, and you are 1 woman. Step aside, and you may live. Or you may kill me here, in front of everyone, and reveal yourself before you complete your mission." Beatrice's heart was pounding so hard she could barely hear her own words, but her voice remained steady. Is that what Lord Stanhope would want? A public scandal? An investigation? Witnesses who saw his servants commit murder? For the first time, uncertainty crossed the assassin's face. Behind her, Beatrice heard the Duke's voice, deep and calm, discussing factory reforms with men who held the future of England in their hands. She had to keep the assassins here, had to delay them until what? She had no plan. She had only herself. "I know what you did to the chandelier," she said quietly. "I was there. I saw you remove the bolt. I can describe your face, your clothes, your movements in perfect detail. If anything happens to the Duke tonight, I will testify. I will name you. I will ensure that Lord Stanhope's name is dragged through every court in England." The assassin's eyes went cold. "Then you will not live to testify." He reached beneath his tray, and Campbell's voice rang out across the ballroom. "Miss Grey, there you are. His Grace has been asking for you." Campbell was striding toward them, his expression pleasant, his hand resting casually inside his coat, where any observer might guess a weapon waited. Behind him, 2 more men, servants, guards, moved to flank the second assassin. The first assassin froze, his hand still beneath the tray. "I would not," Campbell said pleasantly. "There are 30 guests within sight of this spot, and my men have already identified your companion. You may kill 1 of us, perhaps 2, but you will not escape, and Lord Stanhope will be exposed as the architect of murder." For a long, terrible moment, no one moved. The music played on, guests laughed and chattered, utterly unaware of the tableau frozen in their midst. Then the assassin's hand slowly emerged from beneath the tray. Empty. Wise choice. Campbell stepped forward and took the tray from the man's unresisting hands. Now, if you and your friend would be so good as to accompany my associates to a more private location, we have much to discuss. The second assassin had already been surrounded, his covered dishes confiscated. They went quietly, their faces blank with the acceptance of professionals who had been outmaneuvered. Beatrice stood trembling as Campbell turned to her. You should not have done that. Someone had to. You could have been killed. I wasn't. She managed a shaky smile. You arrived in time. Campbell's expression softened, just slightly. So I did. The Duke appeared at Beatrice's side, his face grave. Miss Grey, I owe you more than I can ever repay. But we are not finished yet. Stanhope must be confronted, and I would have you present when it is done. She should have refused. She should have returned to Lady Catherine's party and pretended nothing had happened. But she had come this far, and she would see it through to the end. Lord Stanhope was still holding court near the orchestra, his gold-handled cane tapping, his smile fixed in place. He did not see them approach until the Duke was directly before him. Stanhope. The Duke's voice carried no anger, only a calm certainty. I believe your servants have something they wish to discuss with the authorities, something about a chandelier and an opera and a carriage in a mews. For just an instant, Stanhope's composure cracked. Then it was back, smooth and untroubled. I have no idea what you mean, Atherton. No. Then you will not object to explaining your relationship with the two men my secretary just detained, professional assassins, unless I miss my guess, hired to kill me before tomorrow's vote. A ripple of shock ran through the nearby guests. Conversations faltered, heads turned. Stanhope's smile did not waver. This is absurd. You have no proof. I have two witnesses. The Duke gestured to Beatrice. Miss Grey saw your man sabotage the chandelier. She saw him receive instructions from your carriage at the opera. And now she has identified him again, in your own house, wearing your livery. Stanhope's gaze shifted to Beatrice, and for a moment she saw something terrible in his eyes, not fear, but a cold assessment of threat. A fortune hunter, he said contemptuously. A nobody trying to attach herself to a powerful man. No one will believe her. I believe her. The Duke's voice rang clear. Campbell believes her, and when those assassins begin talking, as they will to save their own necks, the world will believe her too. Stanhope's hand tightened on his cane. For a moment Beatrice thought he might strike out, might do something desperate, but he was too old, too careful, too aware of the watching eyes. You have made a dangerous enemy, Atherton. I have made many dangerous enemies. They have a habit of underestimating me. The Duke smiled without warmth. Good evening, Stanhope. I trust you will be available when the authorities call. He turned away, offering his arm to Beatrice. She took it, feeling the solid strength beneath his sleeve, and let him lead her from the ballroom. Behind them, Lord Stanhope stood alone among the glittering guests, his empire crumbling around him. Epilogue. The morning after. The Reform Bill passed by a margin of 17 votes. Beatrice read the news in her aunt's morning room, her hands steady now, her heart at peace. The Duke had kept his promise. The assassins had talked. Stanhope had been arrested, and the full story would soon be public. But for now, she simply enjoyed the knowledge that she had played her part. Aunt Prudence burst into the room, waving a newspaper. Beatrice, have you seen? Lord Stanhope, arrested, conspiring to murder, and the Duke of Atherton says in the Times that he owes his life to an unnamed young lady of extraordinary courage. Beatrice smiled. How exciting for her. For her? Beatrice, it must be you. You were at that ball. You were acting so strangely afterward. Aunt, please. Beatrice set down her paper. If I were that young lady, do you think I would be permitted to tell anyone? These things must remain secret for the sake of the investigation. Aunt Prudence deflated slightly but brightened again almost immediately. Well, whoever she is, she will be the talk of London. Imagine, a wallflower who saved a duke. The doorbell rang, forestalling further speculation. A moment later, the maid appeared with a card on a silver tray. For Miss Grey. Beatrice took the card. It bore the Duke of Atherton's crest and a simple message. Would Miss Grey do us the honour of joining us for tea this afternoon? There is someone who wishes to thank her properly. She smiled and tucked the card into her pocket. Who is it, Beatrice? No one of consequence, Aunt. Just an invitation to tea. The Duke received her in the same study where she had first told her story. But this time the atmosphere was different, lighter, warmer, touched with relief. Miss Grey. He rose and took her hand. I cannot thank you enough. You saved my life, and you saved the Reform Bill. England owes you a debt it can never repay. Beatrice shook her head. I only did what anyone would have done. No. Campbell's voice came from beside the fireplace. Anyone would have run, anyone would have stayed silent. You followed, you watched, you risked everything. That is not anyone. That is you. She felt heat rise to her cheeks. Mr. Campbell. I speak only the truth. He moved closer, and something in his expression made her breath catch. The Duke has offered me a position as his private secretary, a permanent role, with a house of my own and a salary that would support a family. That is wonderful news. It is. But it would be more wonderful still if I had someone to share it with. He glanced at the Duke, who nodded slightly and withdrew to the far side of the room. Miss Grey, I know we have known each other only a short time, but I have seen your courage, your intelligence, your strength. I have watched you face down assassins and peers of the realm without flinching, and I have realized that I do not wish to face the future without you by my side. Beatrice's heart was pounding, but this time not from fear. Mr. Campbell, are you? I am asking you to marry me. He took her hand. Not because the Duke approves, though he does. Not because you saved his life, though I will be forever grateful for that, but because you are the most remarkable woman I have ever met, and I cannot imagine my life without you. She looked at him, this quiet, watchful man who had moved through shadows and emerged into light. She thought of the ballroom, the attic, the opera, the final confrontation. She thought of all she had risked and all she had gained. Yes, she said. David, yes. His smile was like sunrise. They were married in a quiet ceremony 6 weeks later, after the scandal had died down and Stanhope had been transported for life. The Duke gave the bride away. The newspapers called it a fairy tale, the wallflower who saved a duke and won a husband. But Beatrice knew the truth. She had not saved a duke. She had saved herself. She had stepped out of the shadows and into the light, and she would never be a wallflower again. In the ballroom of her memory, the chandelier still fell. But in the ballroom of her future, she danced, not against the wall, but in the centre, with David Campbell's hand in hers and all of London watching. And for once, she did not mind being seen. The end. My dear and gentle listeners, thus concludes our tale for tonight. If you have walked these winding paths of devotion and doubt with us, if you have felt the hush of candlelit confessions and the tremor of guarded hearts at last laid bare, then you have my most sincere gratitude. It is no small thing to lend one's time and tender attention to a story. In an age as hurried as our own, such constancy is a rare and admirable virtue. I thank you for it most warmly. Should you wish to remain in our company, to wander further through moonlit gardens, stand witness to proud dukes undone, steadfast heroines revealed, and love that triumphs over pride and peril alike, I entreat you to subscribe and join our growing circle. By subscribing, you ensure that no whispered scandal, no long-buried